So you can't see this, but hopefully you can hear it. Behind every Boise State Public Radio podcast is a team working hard to bring you stories that matter. So if you value podcasts like this one, please support them. Hit donate at boisestatepublicradio.org. Thanks.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Every day, grandparents, aunts, uncles, older siblings, even close family friends are stepping in to raise children when their parents can't. Sometimes it happens after a family crisis, other times it happens overnight, and often those caregivers don't see themselves as part of a system. They just see themselves as family. And the numbers, well, they're pretty remarkable. More than 10,000 Idaho children are being raised by their grandparents, and more than 43,000 children live in households headed by relatives. And for every child in foster care living with family, an estimated 18 more are being raised by relatives outside of the foster care system. So Idaho is now taking a unique step. Following the passage of Senate Resolution 118, the Idaho Caregiver Alliance is leading the development of what could be the nation's first comprehensive statewide kinship plan. It's a roadmap built not just for families, but with families. So joining us today are three people who are helping make that happen. Keith Mason is CEO of United Healthcare Community Plan of Idaho, whose support is helping to make the statewide effort possible. Tammy Cresswell is a kinship caregiver. She's raising her granddaughter. And Sheila Weaver is program manager with the Idaho Caregiver Alliance, the organization facilitating the state plan. I want to thank all of you for being here today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you,
Hello.
Gemma.
Sheila, let me start the conversation with you today. Can you tell us what exactly is kinship care? And why do you think so many Idahoans are already part of it without ever maybe even realizing there's an actual name for what they're doing?
Right. Like you said, kinship care is when just a grandparent or another relative or a close family friend steps in to raise a child when a child's parents are just unable to do so. And many of these kinship families are involved with foster care, but many of them are not. I think they're doing it because Idahoans, throughout my career, I've seen Idahoans step up time and time again for their families and the people that they love in their communities. Most of the time, kinship caregivers are not calling themselves kinship caregivers. They're just saying, "I'm raising my grandson," or "My niece came to live with me," or "Of course we're doing this. We're family." So we just really see Idahoans across the state showing up for people in their lives.
So Tammy, talk to us about what happened in your situation. Can you walk us through that? And and when you made that decision that you were going to raise your granddaughter.
Sure. Thank you for having me. We have had custody or guardianship of our granddaughter she's almost 13. So as soon as she was born, my daughter, her mother, was living with us. And my daughter took a different path and we had to step in, and it was just, there was a need. We knew what we had to do, my husband and I, and we raised her from 4 months old. It just happened, and it's been a wonderful blessing, but it has not been easy. I'm in my 50s, my husband's in his 60s, and he's retired. I'm still working. So there was just a lot to navigate, as well as, the family dynamics, the drama, and just making sure we're meeting everyone's needs.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Tammy, my parents raised, well, she's my sister. I mean, I call her my sister, my youngest sister, who is actually biologically my niece. And can you talk a little bit more about, the fact that you said the family drama? That definitely happened in my family, right? You step in to raise this child and to make sure that they are cared for. They are in a loving, safe, secure home. But not, so on top of navigating all of these other challenges, you also navigate the fact that you still want a relationship with your child as well, I would think. But this can change things.
It literally did change things, and it's not really the the happy ending that I was hoping for because my daughter passed away when Paisley, my granddaughter, was almost 4 years old.
Mm,
So, you know, Paisley is thriving and she's healthy and happy. And really, I don't know how we did it looking back. I don't even know how we survived it or continuing to, but it's a blessing having her. She's helped us heal a lot and changed our lives considerably. So, I think there's a point in the journey where it's just instinct, that this is the only thing that matters really is your
mm,
family and doing the best for everyone, making sure they're safe and happy and healthy, meeting those needs. And it shows with how she is today. And unfortunately, we lost my daughter, her mother, but she left us a beautiful gift.
mm. I thank you for sharing that with us, Tammy. That I am so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Keith, let me bring you into. You're welcome, Keith. Let me bring you into the conversation because I want to talk about a healthcare perspective and why is it important for organizations like United Healthcare to invest in families like Tammy's family who step into these caregiving roles.
Yeah, I think the reason United Healthcare is investing or providing resources to the Idaho Caregiver Alliance to help individuals like Tammy and the 10,000 other Idahoans that are providing kinship care to children across Idaho is that, whether it's their physical health or their emotional health or even their social health, you know, they need those resources, they need those supports. And if they can get it from kin, again, like Sheila said at the beginning, whether it's a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a neighbor, that's a great place to do it rather than potentially moving away from that situation into with a person that maybe they don't know or doesn't have those supports. So, again, United Healthcare is extremely happy to be part of the village. I think that's the important thing here is we had a kickoff meeting a couple weeks ago. ICA ran it, and around the table was the state represented by IDHW, or the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. You had the Idaho Foster and Adoptive Parent Association, Casey Family Programs. You had all these people, about 25 people sitting around the table, excited about getting the plan off the ground and kind of figuring out how best to support individuals like Tammy and Paisley, right? So we're just super excited to be part of that. And then quite frankly, I'm excited about it too, because I get to blend my professional and personal. So I've been a foster parent, I've been a kinship parent, and I'm an adoptive parent. So this really allows me to blend kind of best of both worlds.
And Sheila, one thing that really surprised me is just how many children are living in kinship families outside of foster care. Why do you think that population has remained largely invisible for so long?
I think there's a lot of reasons. I think there can often be a lot of stigma involved with kinship care. Often folks think they're the only ones whose daughter went to prison or whose son died or whose niece or nephew got in some kind of situation where they were no longer able to raise their children. And often for families, it just feels very natural. It's the work that they already feel like it's just part of the family system. So instead of advertising it or talking about it, they just pick it up and do it. And I don't know that kinship caregivers always really understand the resources and what's kind of out there available to them. I was also raised in a kinship caregiver home by my grandparents, and I showed up at their door when I was 6 years old, and they just walked me in the front door and continued on with their life. They weren't reaching out to people or doing anything. They just did what they believed the right thing was to do at the time. And 40 years later, since I was 6 years old, I don't know if that's changed very much. Families are still just showing up wherever they can for the kids in their lives.
Mhm. That's how my parents were. I mean, my youngest sister was 6 months old, and I mean, I was
Yeah.
4, I think, when. So it is something that people just do, and so Sheila, maybe is that part of it too, right? As you said, that in many families, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily go out and advertise the fact that you're raising a child that isn't, biologically your child.
Right. And like you mentioned before, too, there are kind of these tricky family dynamics. Often when there's this kind of relational shift in a family and the grandparents become parents or the aunt and uncles become parents, other relatives often have opinions and their own thoughts about this and their own reactions to this. And
Hmm.
so I think that can really play into it too, where we're just kind of maintaining a family system the best we know how to make sure the kids that we love are taken care of.
Yeah. So, Tammy, can we talk a little bit about the logistics of when you became parents again, when you became a kinship caregiver? Because some of the challenges, maybe, right? Because all of a sudden, here you've already raised your children. I mean, as you said, you probably thought you were going into another phase of life. All of a sudden, you find yourself having to navigate things like, I'm thinking, school, healthcare, legal paperwork, right? To have custody. Can you walk us through, some of those challenges that you had to figure out?
Sure, that's a great question. Even though it happened almost 13 years ago, it seems like yesterday because I was navigating two separate paths at the time, trying to make sure that Paisley was safe and taken care of healthy, but I was also navigating a path to help my daughter and, hopeful that we could bring that together and she could be the mother and I'd be the grandmother and in those defined roles. And so it was difficult because there wasn't a whole lot of information out there. There wasn't a name for what we were
Mm,
doing, kinship or grandparents as parents or blended families, things like that. And so I wasn't sure. I had to dig in and do a lot of research on guardianship because she was an infant and trying to figure out how do I get her into daycare and take her to the doctor and her shots. And then things had changed so much having an infant again,
hmm.
the lack of sleep and then my career path changed as well. Yeah, as you mentioned, my husband and I had a different future planned, away on the weekends and no kids and carefree. But there were other items too, like you said, the legal, wondering what my role is and do I need to find a lawyer and
Mm,
it what kind of resources are out there. And mainly at that time, I think it just would have been helpful to know that there were other families going through the same thing I was because I felt very isolated. And Sheila mentioned earlier, and it's huge too, because what we went through with my daughter, um, it's you're ashamed. You feel like it's your fault being a
mm,
parent, and then it's not something that you want to go out and tell your neighbors and your friends, and lean on anyone because this is an you almost want it to be an isolated experience, but it's so much better when you have support and
yeah.
you have other people that are in this situation that you can talk to. I mean, it just feels very freeing and being supported by a community.
So, Sheila, Idaho is developing what could become the nation's first comprehensive kinship state plan. Can you walk us through what exactly this plan is and what are you hoping it will accomplish?
Absolutely. The Idaho Kinship State Plan is a collaborative statewide effort to really develop what we believe to be the nation's first kinship state plan. It's really about listening to kinship caregivers, building on what's already working across Idaho, and strengthening support for families raising children through kinship care. And again, we really want to listen to kinship caregivers to ensure we can hear more from them. But we'll really serve as that shared plan to build on the strengths of the state, improve coordination, and just strengthening connections between kinship caregivers, communities, and available resources.
Keith, I think a lot of times when we think about healthcare, we just think about things like doctor's visits, right? And, hospital stays, things like that. I think it's fair to say, though, that stable families are really part of good health as well. In your role, but also in your personal role, as you mentioned, how do you think strong family connection influence a child's long-term health and well-being?
So I think as Tammy was talking about, she's going down a path of kind of a normal 50-year-old, 60-year-old, and then Paisley comes in, right? And so there's an energy shift. And so I think that, as you think about the family well-being and kind of what support means, if she would have had support to, take Paisley to a behavioral health therapist, or to take Paisley to a baseball game, or to
Mm.
make sure that Paisley had the right food, which she probably did, but not all kinship families have that opportunity, right? And so I think that the more kind of health plan or kind of the Caregiver Alliance or other organizations can do to support kind of the things that people take for granted on an everyday basis, right? That you can have
Mhm.
fun, that you have the right food, that you have access to, different kinds of appointments. I think it's important that the kinship plan is going to try to do that. And so rather than Tammy spending 50% of her energy that she has on the day trying to navigate the system, the kinship plan is really trying to, fill in the gap on that 50%, or at least get 40% or 35%, so that Tammy and caregivers like her have the energy to kind of live their life that's inclusive of the Paisleys, but also kind of their own life, right? And so I think that that's
Mhm.
really what supports that strong family, is having those supports. And then as a result, you have children that are growing up with kind of the mechanisms so that they can give back to their community. There's less homelessness, there's less death, there's less crime, there's less of everything. And I think that, that individual goes into society kind of at a different place than they would if
Mhm.
they don't have supports, or their kinship caregivers don't have those supports as well to get them there.
So, Tammy, wouldn't we all have liked to have a guidebook handed to us the day, we had a baby, however that baby came into our lives? If someone had handed you a guidebook on that first day you had custody of Paisley, what do you wish it would have included? And I'm asking, based on the fact that, this new plan wants input from family, from kinship caregivers.
I think it would have had a lot of guidance on the services available, things that I know
Mm.
families need, things that we would need. It would all be in one nice section where you could just go right to it. But also, I think there was the mental piece of it that as a mother, as a grandmother, I think that I struggled wondering every day, am I doing enough? Am I doing the right thing? Is she happy? Is she healthy? Can we survive doing this? And most of the time it was, having 3, 4 hours of sleep, and, you're just
Hmm.
exhausted, like Keith mentioned as well. But I think that overall, kids are so resilient. To see her now, and I don't even know what's happened to the last 13 years. It is just amazing that, if you love them, and you love them when they're born, that she was my first granddaughter, and it came natural, and just like with the children, you would hope. But having that comfort of knowing that you're going to get through this, and things are going to be fine. And here she was born premature, and she had some health issues. And so that was a navigation on its own of trying to find services for her speech and learning and things like that. And it just would have been so helpful to have that all there, that said, are you experiencing this? Or is this a problem and you need some assistance with? That would have been really useful.
Hey, can I add a couple
So,
things?
absolutely.
Yeah, so when my niece came into our life, I think the one thing that we tried to figure out was, the goal was to get her back with her parents, right?
Hmm.
Kinship's not necessarily a forever thing, and so I think, in the guidebook, something about, how do you build capacity in the kids that are in your care, for whatever period of time so that they can go back into whatever situation they're going to go back into, right? And be able to not only survive that situation, but thrive in that situation, again, to get to a different place. And maybe they then come back and then they go back and they come back and they go back. And how do you give them the skills? Because that's not necessarily the normal part of you raising, if you were raising kids, those kids, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that would have been helpful for me to be able to say to my niece, you know, these are kind of skills you're going to have to be adaptable and resilient in the face of whatever. And that necessarily wasn't kind of a skill I had in raising my own kids, because they didn't have to transition between kind of places all the time, like my niece or like a Paisley would.
That's a really good point too. And as you said, Keith, if you're, you know, that's something that when you said that, I was like, oh, I haven't thought about something like that, because I haven't had to build that in with my children, right? And so is this also part of, you know, this program moving forward that made you want to say, yes, United Healthcare wants to be a part of this, is understanding these different dynamics and making sure that kinship caregivers, you know how to navigate just the situation that you just laid out?
Yeah, so I think that I've talked to Sheila about this and a variety of people. I'm super excited because I think the health plan is in a unique situation, because potentially as a health plan CEO, I could have the child, I could also have the biological parents, and then potentially I could have the grandma and grandpa, right? So the fun thing for me to think about and figure out how to do is, if I can influence those individuals through the mechanisms and levers that I have, how can I actually do it in a holistic view, right? So if I'm providing behavioral health for the child, how do we make sure that the provider is doing the same in line with the parents, and then potentially gives respite or those same kind of things to the grandparent? So you're approaching it in a holistic manner. And so that's just one aspect of the plan, but I think that's really the gist of it for us is, you know, how do we use the levers we have to approach it holistically? Just don't think about the kid, just don't think about the bio parents, just don't think about the grandparents, but how do you think about it all together? And I think that's what the ICA and the other stakeholders are going to try to do with this plan that we're doing statewide.
So Sheila, talk to us about how you're developing the plan. And because my understanding is you are going to be doing like statewide surveys and community conversations. So can you kind of walk us through what these next few months are going to look like?
Absolutely, thank you. So statewide surveys for kinship caregivers and organizations that support kinship families are going to be launching later this month, and they'll remain open for the next couple months. And then in addition to that, we're going to be doing interviews and having community conversations throughout the planning process. And with all of this, we'll have an Idaho Kinship State Plan to release in spring of 2027. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking to folks, gathering information, putting it all together, and then having recommendations and a full state plan in spring 2027 in time for the legislative session.
And I know you really would like folks to get involved who are kinship caregivers. So Sheila, before I let all of you go, how do people get involved with that survey? Where do they find out all of the information so that they can give you the information you need to make this the best possible program?
Sure thing. So just want to make sure if there are kinship caregivers listening today and you're thinking, I need help today, we really encourage folks to contact 211. They're a hub, and say you're a kinship caregiver. And if you'd like to get involved in the kinship caregiving plan, and we sure hope that you will, you can visit the idahocaregiveralliance.com. Our front page has a link to where the survey will be at, to receive the survey, so you can hop right on idahocaregiveralliance.com for all the information.
Well, I want to thank all of you so much. Thank you for sharing with us about this program, about the development of it, also telling us your personal journeys as well. It's been really appreciated. We've been speaking with Keith Mason, the CEO of United Healthcare Community Plan of Idaho, Tammy Cresswell, she's a kinship caregiver raising her granddaughter, and Sheila Weaver is with Idaho Caregiver Alliance. You've been listening to the Idaho Matters podcast from Boise State Public Radio. To stay in touch, you can find quick Idaho daily news every morning when you subscribe to the Connector podcast. And you can also listen to Boise State Public Radio podcasts, including Idaho Matters, on YouTube.
Each story you hear on Planet Money starts with a question. What happens if we refund tariffs? Why are groceries so expensive? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious, because the forces shaping our world can be hard to see. Follow NPR's Planet Money wherever you get your podcasts and start seeing how the economy really works.